Hello, Zibby. Welcome to our show. I'm so happy to have you here. And as I was telling you just a moment ago, your bookshelf is incredible. If you're watching this on YouTube, I mean, you see what I mean. If you're not watching this on YouTube, go pause the episode and find us on YouTube because it's beautiful. It's like colored by, different it's categorized by color just like our bookshelves are, but on a massive scale. Like it looks like the Beauty and the Beast library.
It actually goes all the way around the room, not to make you even more, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, make me green with envy. That's incredible. Well, Zibby, you are quite the media maven. I mean, goodness, you are an author, you're a publisher, you're a podcaster. So, you just for those who are not familiar with you and your work, can you share just the different arms of your business real quick for some context, like Zibby Mag, Z Books, etc.?
Sure. I mean, it all came out of my podcast, which is called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, fellow podcaster with you, Ellen. And I started that in 2018. And from there, I got to know authors so well that all these other business ideas and opportunities seemed to unfold in front of me. So this was not the master plan from day one, but I have the podcast and I've now helped other people start podcasts. So I have a little mini podcast network of 8 shows, which I'm calling Zibby Audio, was known as Zcast, and that's all in the Acast network. We started Zibby Mag, which is a magazine featuring all different kinds of authors and stories, book excerpts, reviews, lit lifestyle features. And it's the combination of the literary world and a lifestyle brand. And the goal is to help get to know authors better, which is honestly the goal of all of my businesses. And then I also started a publishing company, which was so much more work than I expected. Not afraid of hard work, so I don't mind, but whoa. And we have acquired 25 books already, or work by 25 authors, I should say, because some are multiple deals. And they start coming out on February 7th. And the books are fiction and memoir, contemporary. And so I have a whole team around that. So those are the main arms. And we're calling the whole thing Zibby Media right now, but who knows? It might change.
Wow, I'm truly so impressed. I feel like my 10-year-old self is fangirling so hard because I was someone who grew up loving writing, entering writing contests, and I remember I've told this little snippet a few times on the show, but there were times in elementary school I distinctly remember going on the Scholastic website because that was the only really publisher I knew as a young kid, and looking up how do you become an author, like where do you submit a book manuscript. So the fact that you have created your own publishing company is truly awe-inspiring. And I wish we had more time today to delve into that whole world. But as you know, we're here for your case study today on how you were able to make $25,000 in sales over 4 afternoons hosting book fairs in your own home, which is a really novel concept that I'm very excited to hear more about. Before we do that, the first question that I always like to ask my guests to set the scene is, what is your cubicle to CEO story? How did you make that jump from employee to entrepreneur?
Well, it has not been a straight jump. Let me say it that way. I was in a cubicle. And actually this morning I was telling someone how happy I am not to be in a cubicle. Like that was not the life for me. It was like, so I couldn't understand. It was so inefficient. I would get a whole list of things to do in the morning and I'd like finish them by noon. And they were like, that was supposed to take you all week. And I'm like, no, I'm really fast. Like now what do I do? Like, why do I have to sit here? Anyway, but after my last cubicle job, which was great and taught me a lot, that was at Unilever doing consumer marketing for the launch of the Vera Wang fragrance. This is way back in 2000 actually. I went to business school. And after business school, I decided to take time off to write a book because I had lost my best friend on 9/11 and many other people over the last year. And I was trying to go back to advertising and work at Young and Rubicam for the summer. And I had yet another person die where I had to leave my desk and go to a funeral. And I was like, you know what, if I'm going to die at my desk, I better be bringing my whole self to whatever I'm doing. So I decided to write a book. I had always been a writer from the time I was able to hold a pen, and that's something I always wanted to do. Like you as a kid, I was like, how do I do this though? Right? Like what are the steps? And I tried different routes into being an author myself, because I should have mentioned that in my bio. I'm also an author. Oversight, even though that's been like my life goal. And I tried like working at Vanity Fair magazine to see if that might be it. If I started a magazine, will I be a writer? And that didn't work after that internship. So I ended up trying to write a book. I wrote a second book, and then I had kids, and I stayed home for many years I have 4 kids, and I stayed home for 11 years doing some freelance writing on the side. So when I came back to work, I was basically trying to invent things for myself. I worked at a couple startups. I love everything entrepreneurial. I worked at this company called Idea which was an internet incubator for years after college, and watched all those businesses grow. I worked on this other business called Gaggle of Chicks, a daily deal site for moms like Groupon. I helped my husband's family start a crumb cake business, which was also really interesting. And I learned a lot about frozen shipping for refrigerated trucks, things I never thought I'd know about. So when it came time to do this, I started small. I didn't think of this as like, this is my new job. It was like, I'm going to write another book, which I did. And while I'm writing the book, I'm going to start this podcast and let's see what happens. And maybe no one will listen. And so everything has built from there. It all comes from the place of wanting to be a writer and wanting to share stories, and also being a reader, because I'm a huge reader, always have been, love reading so much. And celebration of authors, I think, is just so important.
What I find so inspiring about your story is that, like many entrepreneurs, you didn't necessarily set out with a specific vision in mind saying, all right, this is what I'm doing and here's a path A, B, C, D, right? It's very much an evolving door of, let me try something for a little while. Let's see what I liked about it, what I didn't. And inevitably other doors open as a result of that. And so I think that's what's so beautiful, and such a good reminder, especially for those of you listening today who are early in your business journey, just reminding yourself that there are often things that you can't accurately anticipate from the place that you are in currently.
Totally.
And who you are 5 years from now, looking back, you'll see the dots connect then, but looking forward, it can feel almost impossible. So don't be afraid to just say yes to the internship, say yes to learning about trucks and
Yeah.
refrigeration, right? Because you never know how that will play a role in your work later down the line. So
Anything where you're learning helps. You're learning something, you're learning skills. And by the way, a lot of things did not work. Like, it's not like everything I started was successful, but instead of viewing it as like, okay, that is a dead end, everything is like, no, that just means I have to turn and go somewhere else. Like I'm in a game of Pac-Man.
yes. Ooh, I like that. Yes. Life and business especially can very much mirror a video game, right? It's like, all right, it's like what boss are we going to be up against at this level, and how do we navigate that challenge? So that's what keeps it fun. That's what keeps it exciting.
Mhm.
Zibby, I would love to know, for this particular case study, for setting the scene here, what was the catalyst for creating a book fair? I mean, my only real experience with book fairs was, again, as a child, going to scholastic book fairs, right? Like that one afternoon during the school year where you get to take some time away from the classroom and run around and look at all these things. What inspired you to bring a book fair to your home?
Well, 2 things. One, as I mentioned, I have 4 kids, so I was going to many book fairs, and I was volunteering, I was doing all of that, so I was deep in the kid world and kid mindset. And I've always loved book fairs, as most book lovers have. And I go with my kids and I'm like, oh my gosh, my arms are like overflowing with books. And they're to the point where they're embarrassed. And I'm like, okay, fine, this is too many. Um, but I had started interviewing authors for the podcast. And I interviewed Dani Shapiro, actually, who's one of my favorite authors of all time. And she suggested I do a salon style event because she had gone to similar events like that in the city and said, you should just, I'm happy to be your first guest, but you could invite people to your house and talk and do all this stuff. And I loved that idea. And I thought, you know what? Like, and I don't know what made me think this, but I was like, why don't I invite all the authors? Actually, it was probably my husband's idea because he has lots of great ideas. I think he said, oh no, we had a cocktail party. Um, we had a cocktail party around the same time. And he said, why don't you invite some of the authors who have been on your podcast? And I was like, oh, they won't want to come like to our party with all our friends. Why would they come? And he's like, well, maybe they would think it was really fun. Maybe they're not invited. Maybe, I don't know. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll invite a few authors. And I hope that's not like unprofessional, or I don't know what I thought, but I invited them. They came. They had the best time ever. They were like the stars of the party too. So my regular friends were really excited to meet all the authors. The authors were excited to meet readers, and that was one of the inputs into my decision to do the book fair, which is when I decided to do the event with Dani, I was like, why don't I invite authors and my friends again and put them all together? And if I'm going to invite their authors, wouldn't it be nice if their books were here so that they could sell their books? And then I thought, wait, why don't I just sell all the books from the first couple months of the podcast and invite everyone to meet each other? Because I saw how happy they all were meeting each other together at the party. So I was like, I'll just try it. So, and I talked to Bookhampton, the bookstore I had been most closely affiliated with, and said, would you send me all these books? And you could just come in and sell them. Like, I wasn't trying to profit myself. I was really just trying to help the authors and introduce people. I love connecting people. So that's where it came from.
That's brilliant.
I did that, and then I did it again a couple other times, and I kept changing. I changed things a little bit each time, like learning more. The second time I did it over 3 days instead of only having one event because so many people were like, I can't come. And then the third time I did it, I offered pre-sales. So people who knew they couldn't come, I offered like that I would be their personal shopper. And I sent the list out, and then I like ran around and packed up bags and delivered them to their houses. So I tried all these different fun things. And then my last book fair was the only one I haven't done in my house, but I did it in LA, and that was to celebrate the publication of my memoir, which is called Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature. And in Bookends, whenever I think of events that have happened in my life, I associate a book with it. And so I told the story of my life with the books that I was reading alongside all the events. And I have a whole book list at the end. And I thought, wait, wouldn't it be so cool if I got all these books in the same place? Almost like gathering friends. So I ordered all the books. I became a registered bookseller and had them come to this event space I rented in the Palisades in LA, and sold all the books in an afternoon. And that was also amazing. Different crowd, a little bit harder since it was on the second floor, and like I had to lean over the banister and be like, "Come upstairs to the book fair." um, but I still did. I still sold $5,000 of books that afternoon. So I just love it. I love being around all the books. I love the idea of authors being there to sign their books next to other people. And not have it be so transactional, but then have it like I don't have authors sit behind their books or anything like that. I'm like, oh, go find the author. She's here or he's here, so that the authors can mingle and get to know each other and leave with new friends.
The creative side of my brain and the people side of my brain is in love with this concept because as a lifelong reader, you so rarely get to interact outside of your own headspace, right? Like you experience a book and it's such a personal thing that you experience. So
Mm-hmm.
getting to actually talk to the person who wrote the words that have some sort of impact on your life, or getting even more so to connect with other readers who have also experienced the book and getting to hear their take on it. It turns this deeply, I think, personal and private experience into this true experiential model, which um,
Yes.
not a lot of authors, I think, outside of like maybe when they go on a book tour, if even that, right, in today's age, I think it's just such a unique concept. And it actually, your first point about how this whole thing was sparked through the cocktail party and your husband saying, hey, why don't we just invite your podcast guest to our home? It reminds me of a conversation I had with my friend Tiffany Napper. She used to work in publicity, and she was mentioning how I think at this point in time, she was working in PR for like the American Cancer Association, I believe. And she had mentioned how one of the things they did that was really out of the box was invite members of the press to her personal home for a backyard barbecue. And she
Mm-hmm.
was like, it was so strange. Like people don't typically get an invite like that. So to them, it felt special. It felt intimate and personal. And I'm sure that your podcast guest, when you were like, is this professional? But in their minds, they probably thought this is so cool that someone is inviting me to their home to hang out with their real life friends. And so I just wanted to pull that piece out again for the listeners because I think it's permission, right? To say try something that maybe is not the standard for your industry. Like you never know what could result from that. And
And by the way, they've now become my friends. Like some of my
right.
best friends now I've made through the podcast. I still have all my old regular best friends who are wonderful, and my old friends and all of that. Like that's great. Not that I have enough time for this, but yeah, but I keep making all these relationships. And the best thing to me is when I find out that all these authors have become friends as a result of
Mm.
my connection with them. And now it's starting to happen as well. We have a reading group and we have a book club, Zibby's virtual book club. We have a writing group, and all those people are starting to meet up places. And it's just amazing. Someone just posted the other day, like, here are all 6 of us from all over the country. We decided to meet up after being in, the Zibby's writing group or whatever. I'm like, this is excellent, because like just this notion of making the world another place is connected by books, right? That like there are these, like a rope with all the readers who have read a certain book, and how it doesn't matter where you are, you're still part of that rope. Like you're doing some sort of trust exercise, and like if you pull it in, you get everybody all together. It's like it's just really cool.
It's really beautiful, like a truly a beautiful, I think, concept and also an experience. I actually, as we're speaking, Zibby, I already have friends top of mind that are authors who need to plug into your community. I'm very excited to send them this episode once it goes live.
Thank you.
I do want to ask real quick, returning to the case study at hand with the book fairs. So with your first one, I know you said you invited some of your podcast guests to come sell their books. Was every book that was represented there at the book fair exclusively, like an author was also there present, or did you have a collection of other books that were being sold at the book fair that you didn't necessarily have a connection to the author, or they weren't necessarily going to show up?
I only sold books that I had featured on the podcast,
Hmm.
but not all the authors could come.
Okay.
But if I had 100 on the podcast, maybe 40 authors came. So you still had 40 authors milling about, signing books and hanging out
That's
and eating,
huge.
drinking. Yeah, it's so fun. And I've had authors come at each time. In fact, the more I'm talking about this, I'm like, I really need to do this again.
I know, I'm
So
like, can I come? I'm not an
I
author,
know, I
but
know. Well, to be honest, I'm trying to open a bookstore, like a physical bookstore experience place. Um, and I want to do that all the time. Like I love doing that and featuring books on the podcast and interesting combinations of books and books for gifts. Anyway, I have just so many ideas, but not enough time.
yeah. Oh my goodness. I would love to experience that someday. So walk us through this process though, because even if you're listening to this right now and you're not an author, I do think there's so much you can take away from understanding how to take something, again, that maybe your end customer experiences privately and turn it
Hmm.
into a community oriented experience. I keep saying that word, but for lack of
No,
a
no, I like it. I
better
actually wrote
word.
it down here. I was like, I'm trying to think of a tagline for everything that we're doing. So I'm sort of liking this because it is experience, and we're
Yeah.
starting to do retreats where we're going to go away. In fact, you should come to one of them once I schedule it. But we're going to do one in Charleston in the spring, and another
Amazing.
one in Hampton Bays. And I want to bring this sort of my apartment connection thing out to like everyone. So, uh, anyway, that's in the works as well. But there is something about like in person connection, like uh yeah, gathering, all of that that I think is so central. But anyway, yes,
Mhm.
this applies to many industries. There's so many things that I thought I couldn't do, right? That there were all these professional boundaries, and
Right.
I've decided to live my life as if there is sort of nothing that is professional or not. Like my husband would always like sit down and talk to like the waitress for like 20 minutes or so. I'm like, what? That's she's being a waitress right now. You can't talk to her like about her. And he's like, what do you mean? She's a person. Like
Mm.
she's not a waitress. She's like I'm just gonna hang out. So I've sort of let go of all these artificial boundaries, and I think that the pandemic and everybody being on Zoom and sharing their backgrounds and their homes and their kids and their lives is has just fueled the fire for this. That I'm not sure what the benefit of being super professional is. I'm not saying you should be a slob or a slouch or like be inappropriate, but I'm just saying this whole construct of being uber professional, does it really help us?
Yeah.
I don't know. What would your life look like if you were less professional and more you, even in the workplace? So,
Okay, we're back for a lightning round with Zibby Owens. Zibby, I'm going to fire off 3 questions at you, whatever comes to mind. Say what's on your mind. Ready?
yes,
All right. First question. This is easy. What is your favorite holiday?
Valentine's Day.
Wow. I've actually never met anyone who said that. Okay. I like that. What is your work at home uniform?
Usually a long skirt and a sweater.
I'm continually fascinated by you. I expected something totally different. I love this. Okay. I'll have to try the long skirt life. Um, Question number 3. What song always gets you out on the dance floor?
Um, um, this is my fight song. Fight song.
By
Remember this?
Rachel
Yes,
Platten.
yes, yes.
Yes,
Fight song by Rachel Platten.
I love that song. It's such an anthem. Yes, so empowering. Speaking of taglines, what popped in my head is like be less professional and more personal. And
Yes,
to me, being professional isn't necessarily a way you dress or a way you speak or, whatever is considered like very in many ways keeping people at a distance, right? Like
yes, yes.
separating yourself from your work. I think
Exactly.
being professional is more being in integrity with what you say you're going to do and how you make people feel in any sort of interaction. I think that if it's a positive interaction, you're being professional, right? So I think it's all about that integrity piece. But for your book fair, I would love for you to walk us through the process, Zibby, of what that actually looked like. Like how did you, get the authors on board? Was that as simple as an email reach out? Did it, require a little bit more logistics or convincing? How did you set up the book fair? Like, were you the one running to the distributors, bringing all these books in, or did the author show up with the books? How did you set it up? How did you market this event? All of these little details. Walk us through the A to Z so we can picture what it was like doing this with you in real time.
Okay. So the first thing I did is I came up with the list of the books that I wanted to sell. And so I put that like in a document or maybe in a spreadsheet. I hate spreadsheets. It probably was not a spreadsheet.
Same.
Probably in a Word doc. Um, and then I picked a date and time that I wanted to do this event that would work. And I put it on my calendar and said, okay, this is when I'm going to do it. Then the next step was I started reaching out to bookstores to see I if they would order me all these books and allow me to do it in my house. And by the way, Bookhampton was not my first choice. I feel bad even saying that. But I started by randomly calling a lot of the bookstores in New York City, where I'm based, who I had no relationships with before. But I was like, hey, I'd love to sell all these books in my apartment. I'll give you all the proceeds. Would you like to do it? And they still said no. Like, we don't really know,
Wow.
yeah, they don't really know you. Da, da, da. Like, sorry, this, that, or the other thing. We can't do that. So I kept getting no's. But again, I don't get dissuaded when I have my mind set on something. So I kept calling. I was like, well, maybe they'd come in from the Hamptons. So I called Bookhampton and they were more than happy to come in. They shipped me the books directly. So boxes arrived at my apartment. It came directly here. Authors did not bring their own books. The next thing I did once I ordered the books, or once I knew that the bookstore would order the books, is I went through my list. And again, I had relationships with all of these people because they'd all just been on my podcast. So I emailed them all, or if I only had the publicist information, I emailed them all, and I made it personal. And I was like, I'm inviting all the guests from the first 6 months of my podcast, and I'm inviting all the authors to come and sign their books, and the books will be for sale. And uh, many of them said, "Oh, that sounds amazing," and said yes right away. So that was great. And then once a few said yes, I think I started saying like, 20 authors have already confirmed, would love you to come. And then, of course, I had to follow up on the ones that hadn't come. And then I had to follow up and send reminders. Then I got a paperless post together. And once I knew about how many authors were coming, which was about 40, I could say on my invitation, please join 40 plus authors from the podcast Moms No Time to Read Books and come to this holiday book fair. And I decided to do an event with Danny Shapiro, do a panel, like a little conversation for part of the time with Danny, and also another author who I had recently interviewed who I thought was amazing, named Piper Weiss. And I thought they could have a very interesting conversation together, which they did, that I would moderate. And so I put that on the invitation. And then I literally sent it to everybody I knew in New York, which is like many people because I've lived here forever and I have 4 kids and they have schools and preschools and blah, blah, blah. So, and I was a little worried I'd have too many people, but I've since realized that no matter how many things I send out, you never get all those people. And that, like, of course, people cancel. So I'm never afraid of inviting too many people. I really like to be inclusive. So I blasted that out. And then when the books arrived, I enlisted the help of my kids. So literally put the kids to work, and my mother-in-law was visiting and my grandmother-in-law. They've actually, the two of them have both tragically passed away from COVID, but they were here, and my husband, and we would unpack the boxes and we merchandise them together. So as we were pulling them out, we first put all the stacks out sort of on the side of my dining room and decided, should we put this in the dining room? Then I realized we didn't have enough space, so we rented a couple tables, like just folding tables, and got like really cheap tablecloths, and decided to make each room have different books by genre. So I was like, so that when people walked in, I could be like, this room is memoir. If you're interested in fiction, go in the dining room. And I had books on every surface. I took like my kids' little tables and like like threw books on those, and then I'm pretty sure I did something cute, like made cookies, or I sold candles at one of them. I made some candles at one point that said, leave me alone, I'm reading. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always smooth sailing. I remember for one book fair, the bookseller wanted to order different quantities than I wanted them to do. And I was like, look, it might not sell, but I cannot have an author come here and only have 5 books when everybody else has towering stacks. That you want this author to have 40 books and you want this author to have 5 books? Absolutely not. I can't do that. And so I kept saying that to the bookstore. And then finally, when they kept saying no, I was like, listen, I'm going to register as a bookseller and I'm going to get the extra books, or I'm going to go to every bookstore in the city and buy them, because I cannot invite an author over and only have 5. If you would like to be part of that, fine. But if not, I'm just letting you know I've already gotten this started and I've talked to somebody at Ingram and blah, blah, blah. And then funny enough, they came through. So, but I felt, again, really, really strongly about that, because that reflected how much importance I placed on them and their work. And I don't like, I mean, that's one thing I do in Zibby books too. It's like every author is a lead title. Like every book is a lead title. Every author, we don't have frontlist, backlist authors. I mean, how terrible is that? Everyone's an author. Everyone is a celebration. So that's sort of my philosophy. And then the kids and I unpacked everything and moved things around. One year we got little stickers that said, as seen on Moms No Time to Read Books. So I had one of my kids put little stickers on everything. And
So smart. I love that. I just, sorry, I had to jump in. I think that what a cute, I mean, yes, it's a branding moment, but again, it's about that community tie, right? It's like you're all here because this was our common starting place. This was our common connection point. So it's a reminder, a physical reminder of that.
and I gave everybody, when they checked out, everybody got a custom like a tote bag with the Moms No Time to Read Books logo on it. So then people would be like wandering around New York and be like, I was there, oh, did you
Yes.
get that at Zibby's? And so yeah, everything's a branding moment. And each time I had different speakers lined up to talk.
Well, I just love hearing this whole I the whole time you were talking, I was literally visualizing every piece of this process. I'm curious, the actual attendees, I'm assuming based on what you shared that this was a free event for people to show up to, so
Yep.
not ticketed. Okay.
Not ticketed. Everybody just bought a bazillion books. I mean, it was amazing. It was right before the holidays, the first one, and people just loaded up and they were like, this is great because these are all the books I want to read. Right? So it was just a hyper curated selection, and I was there also being like the bookseller, being like, and they would say like, what should I get? I'm like, well, who are you shopping for? What are you interested in? And oh, well, here, take this book, because I read all the books. And they're like, how have you read all these books? Meanwhile, now I've read like 1,300 books that have been on the podcast, but that's fine. Not all of them front to back, but and then I started over time also partnering with other organizations. So I did a trunk show with Shoshana, which is a clothing brand, and they brought all their clothes. Another time I worked with something called Marche Madison or something like that, and they brought like other clothes for people to try on. I partnered with Stylish Spoon, which makes these like healthy breakfast muffins, and so I tried to like bring in other brands to work with as well.
That's really smart. I like this concept of partnering with brands outside of your own industry. I do want to ask you a little bit more about that, but before I do, just real quick, going back to the numbers. So you mentioned 4 afternoons, you collectively sold about $25,000, but you also mentioned that when you were getting these publishers on board, that, or I'm not sure what the right word, the distribution, I'm not part of the literary world, so you understand what I mean. you mentioned that you told them, hey, come sell your books at my apartment. You get all the proceeds. So did you get to keep any of that 25,000, or was that all just returned right back to, I guess, the authors and their independent publishers and retailers?
I didn't keep any of it for the first three. I just worked with the bookstore. But for the last one that I did in LA, I ordered the books directly.
Okay.
So what the bookstore did that helped me a lot was that anything I didn't sell, they took care of sending back to the distributor. And it is,
Mhm.
you're right, it is the distributor. And then the distributor like reports the sales to the publisher, and then the publisher reports the sales to the author. I decided to do it directly through the distributor when I was in LA so that I wasn't working with a bookstore. Although to be honest, I did ask a couple bookstores and they said no, and I was like, I'll just do it myself. So I did it myself. But meanwhile, all the extra books are in my garage. So yeah, I need to. That's part of why I want to open a bookstore. Is like I've got to sell the books that are in my garage.
Well, I mean, I seriously, it's interesting what a missed opportunity many of these bookstores had. And again, I think it goes back to our conversation of people sometimes are unwilling to step outside the bounds of what's known, right? Like
Mhm.
this is what our industry does. We sell books in a bookstore. So when you come with a novel idea like, well, can I help you sell your books in my house? I don't know, for whatever reason, logistics, protocol, whatever the reason might be for the hesitation, it's just interesting to observe that as an outsider. And I think it really is an opportunity for anybody listening to this podcast to again think about what are the things that are considered normal in your industry, and how can you maybe push the boundaries a little bit there and think, okay, this isn't what people normally do, but this is something that could create a connection point or could create some sort of in-person experience. And it doesn't have to be this, I think when people think of in-person events, they think of conferences and they think of summits and they think of, oh, this is a whole other lift. It could be as simple as what Zibby did. The first thing is, hey, can I invite you over for a drink or some, appetizers, a dinner, a game night, whatever it is, right? Just creating that moment of connection, I think, is so key. I do want to know, because you didn't keep the proceeds from the first three sales, what for you, since it wasn't revenue driven, what was the main purpose of having these or hosting these book fairs? Did you feel that it was a brand awareness play for your media company, for Zibby Books, your podcast, or something different?
I didn't have the media company or Zibby Books at that time. I only
Oh
had the
wow, okay.
podcast. Yeah, it was
Okay.
only the podcast. As things the last one, I guess I had some of these others in the works, but I wanted to do it because it sounded fun and it sounded like I could bring people together and get to know authors, and that was my mission. So it was very sort of mission aligned what I was doing. And it also, I wasn't like, I'm going to do this for brand awareness, but I was like, I'm going to do this because it's fun. And also it will spread the word of the brand. So word of mouth is hugely important in everything. And so that's really what I did, is let the community know about something that they didn't even know I was doing. They didn't know what was so cool about it. They all started talking. A lot more people started listening. People told each other. I got new authors as a result, as guests. Um, so many things came of it. And people met each other. People would read the book and then get back to me and say, I started listening to your podcast, or your podcast got me into reading, or the book fair got me into reading again. Um, and then they would buy the books I recommended on the podcast, which then made more authors want to come on the podcast because people would buy them. And so after a year or so, I had this huge article written about me that called me New York City's most powerful bookfluencer, and that I really move product because of things like this. And so I think it helped establish me as some sort of an expert in curation. And I mean, essentially, it was a pop up bookstore in my house. So the money that I would have made as a percentage of, like, from that overall sales volume, I would have put into marketing, right? Because
Mhm.
marketing was my biggest thing. And so a lot of the things I do as I'm starting up new ventures are all about, well, what would I spend that money on anyway? Right. So even with my podcast, I had all these free sponsors at the beginning, as long as they would publicize me. And they were like, oh, we get to go on here for free. And I was like, yeah, but I just need you to post about me or something, because if they had paid me, I would have tried to get an ad or something. So for me, marketing in kind is incredibly important and efficient, and seems like a no-brainer where everybody benefits. And so the money, I would have just turned around to spend the money to build the business. So I was already building the business in this way, in a much more intangible way. I mean, even with I'm sorry, I'm like kind of rambling here, but I just did this big retreat where I took all the authors and my team away for 2 nights and 3 days to this beautiful resort in upstate New York. It was expensive. It was an investment. And people are like, why are you doing this? I'm like, trust me, it's going to be worth it. I can't monetize every second of this. I can't justify it necessarily, but just wait. Just you'll see. And it ended up being the most amazing thing ever. The authors are all like best friends. You don't know what's going to come of it. I just like have these instincts like this is worth every penny. Just wait. Wait till if you get people together who are want to talk about books and who are sort of like-minded in some way around story and connection and want to connect, that's when magic happens. And you can't like put a price tag on that.
I'm obsessed with this grassroots perspective in approaching business. And I think in our increasingly online world, we dismiss word of mouth. We dismiss often the intangible, as you said, or the deeply intimate opportunities where we, because especially in business, we're trained to think at scale, right? Everything is about scale. And so when we look at micro moments like I had a new connection with an author today, and you look at that one thing in a vacuum, it's very difficult to see how that particular connection or conversation is going to have any sort of realized impact on your business in terms of dollars to your bottom line. But like you said, what goes around comes around. It's a flywheel effect. It's a ripple of
Yes.
many cascading things, right? That create that impact. And so I feel very inspired right now. I'm honestly thinking, like, what could I do to bring together people who already exist in my network to come together and talk about something that we all feel passionate about or that we all want to connect over? I think anyone can do this. And if you learn anything from Zibby's case study today, it's just that, I mean, even take a look at her first book fair. You'll notice she didn't say, I went and ran Facebook ads for this, or I went and, you know, printed something in a publication or whatever it is. It was as simple as, who do I already know in my real life? Who do my kids know? Who do my like it's just the ecosystem that you've already built from living as a human being on this earth for however many years. You know people, whether or not you think that they're related to your business. And people love to be included, whether or not you think they're going to say yes. Is it's really not up to you to decide. I think you should put the invitation out there and let people have that autonomy to, come to their own conclusion about whether or not they want to be involved. So, Zibby, that's amazing.
Personally, I think you should invite all the guests you've had on your podcast to some sort of like master class or master cocktail reception where you have some amazing CEO of some giant company or something just really cool or edgy, and you have like cocktails and food in a cool place and see who comes. I mean, people want to meet each other. So
I love this idea. I didn't expect this conversation to turn into really like an ideation workshop, but I'm here for it. I think, this is where the real magic happens. I think is when you meet people and you have conversations, you just don't know what can, come to play. So this is it's very meta, but it's like a great demonstration of this happening in real time. Zibby, one more question for you on this case study before I ask you our final question that we ask all our guests. But regarding the case study, you mentioned in-kind partnerships. You also mentioned working with other brands, like you did that trunk show, like you mentioned. What was the thought process behind that? Why a trunk show? How does that relate to your readers, and how do you approach that partnership?
I just feel like people have very limited time. And if they're already here and I could cross something else off the list and I could introduce them to like a brand that I really liked, they've they might as well just get everything done at once. That was why. I mean, I happen to love this woman's clothing. I ended up offering her a book deal. Shoshana, who ran this clothing business, so she's writing a book for us now. But another brand approached me. A couple different brands. Now I'm remembering another one that they asked if they could come, and I was like, sure, why not? Like, come, great. And then another thing I should have mentioned too, that had so much value is that everybody was posting about it. So everyone went back and like took so many pictures of the book fair. Can you believe where I am? Da, 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 and posted and tagged me. And then that's all of how I've like grown my Instagram following. Not that I'm like some massive influencer. I have like, I don't know, 23,000, but I don't like advertise. I don't do things like that. It's all like from one author's network to one friend's network. Da, 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 da. So it's sort of like grown very slowly, but surely with all the right people who are like really engaged with what I'm doing. So
That's another great demonstration of what you mentioned a moment ago about how you could have spent your advertising budget on traditional advertising, but instead, because you chose to host these events that may not have given you a monetary return right on the spot, you got the user generated content, you got the word of mouth, the brand awareness, the sharing that you would have paid for anyways, but it came in a much more organic sense. And I think that's so, so smart. I think really the moral of the story is there's more than one way to do business. And I think Zibby has really shown you all some ways to think about your business differently, maybe approach your strategy a little differently, especially if you're a little sick of the typical advice. Think outside the box. So Zibby, thank you so much for your insight. My final question for you today is, what does being a CEO mean to you?
ugh, no sleep. That's
Simple and honest. I like it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ellen.
And if you're listening, make sure you check the show notes below to follow Zibby on Instagram. Check out all of her amazing work, her podcast, her books, the authors that are coming out through Zibby Books soon, and everything she's up to.